Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Quality Candor, the podcast, episode 3. If we make it past this one, we are golden for the rest of the year. Yeah, that's basically what it feels like every time I hit, the third episode of a show. Do 3 reviews, drop dead. Do 3 cult refreshes, drop dead. And fingers crossed, I do 3 of these, and I come back next week to do episode 4 and all's right with the world. We're gonna shake up a few things here. I'm not gonna guarantee the length of a show. It'll be anywhere between a half hour to an hour. And I say that because I don't have really any pointed reviews to give right about now. This is just the bear of working on so many different projects simultaneously. It's just, sometimes you just don't have time to sit down and fucking watch anything, which I know is violently ironic considering the reading of an article I did last week for episode 2, breaking my own rules, but as the kids say, no one bats 1,000, and that seems to also be the phrase in the air concerning Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, which just premiered in Cannes over in France and has been splitting audiences square down the middle. Some see it as the return of Don Coppola. Megalopolis is this passion project Coppola has had ideas for since literally the late 70s and started development in and around 1983, and is essentially the story of 2 warring ideologies, and the battlefield being this ruined city that one hopes to rebuild into a utopian dream. And it is an insane cast, a bizarrely stacked cast. You have Adam Driver, Giancarlo Esposito, Aubrey Plaza, Shia LaBeouf, Jon Voight, Jason Schwartzman, Talia Shire. You can see some of the Coppola family in here, as you can tell. Lawrence Fishburne, Dustin Hoffman, James Remar, just names upon names upon names, all signing up to help this man who financed it with over $100 million of his own fucking money to get this thing to happen. There is that ephemera in the air of this is a living legend coming back to full life. And I'm also saying this having not seen anything. I'm currently still on the North American landmass. I've not ventured across the pond. I have not gotten to go to any major film festivals. So I'm just running my mouth right now. God damn, I saw the fucking trailer for this film and I want it. I fucking want it. And you know what, also, I'll say this too. You'll have to frickin' pry my wonky art house bullshit from my cold, dead fucking hands. That is how much I want this goddamn film. And I also am saying this too. This thing could get throttled by every critic known to man. Roger Ebert could raise himself from the dead just to give it a thumbs down. Audiences could go shrieking into the streets in droves. I don't give a fucking rat's ass. Some of the imagery I've seen coming out of this film in its trailer alone is some of the most audacious shit I've seen in fucking years. And to be honest, risk-taking in the modern day is the biggest to garner my respect. It's so easy to just play the straight and narrow. It's so easy to grind a franchise into the fucking earth. It's so easy to remake this, reboot that, make your 50 millionth adaptation of X, Y, and Z. It's another thing to do something as brazen as what Don Coppola has done with Megalopolis. I don't care if I get to the end of the 3 hours and I feel like I just got railed by the 20th Century Limited. I gotta see this fucking film. And anyone who needs a jolt in the arm should probably go see it too once it releases, however the hell it releases, seeing as it looks like most of the executives want this thing dead and fucking buried anyway. So that is our moment of topicalness for the show. I don't typically get news items that really get me hyped in this way. First episode, of course, we had John Carter coming to audio, and I can almost always count on one hand the amount of films that excite me each year. Last year, it was films like Godzilla Minus One, Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. This year, it's Megalopolis, and Pete's sakes, there's a few others I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Furiosa, I'm glad to see in theaters. I'm one of these weirdos who has never really... And I go into this in an article on 365 Infantry, my little pulp sci-fi doohickey on the side. And I'm very guarded about my muses. So if there's something that feels like it's going to hit a little too close to what I'm working on, I tend to avoid it. And, you know, I'll come to it later in life, most likely, but Mad Max, both Fury Road and Furiosa, is probably going to be one of those pictures. And I'm probably going to, you know, beat myself up when I'm, you know, 30, 40 something, and I'm watching, be like, oh my god, I could have had this all this time. But for now, I'm like abstaining from this latest era in the Mad Max series. Mainly just because my influences and my inspirations lie more with the first two pictures than it does with a lot of what Miller is doing with Fury Road and with Furiosa. And I don't knock it either. I'm not even saying any of it's bad, because some of the jaw-on-the-floor stunt work, that there are set pieces this man has orchestrated that defy all previous conception. And that's the beauty of these films. Miller lets us have it both fucking barrels. And that's what Fury Road really feels like. But there's also this kind of masala quality. And for those who don't know, masala is the technical term for the kind of Bollywood genre fusion thing that comes out of India a lot, where it's basically every single fucking genre rolled into a movie. RRR had tremendous success a year or two ago. From this. For me, there is such a thing as too much. There is a point at which you... And that could also be a case with Megalopolis, that I could go into this and be like, okay, this is too fucking much. But at the same time, I do have films where I'll let the extremity completely pummel me, and I'll come up, you know, asking for fucking seconds. Dario Argento's Suspiria buries you in the fucking earth with this eye-watering use of vintage street thrift Technicolor with that pounding goblin score that just takes up every fucking, you know, frequency in the spectrum, you know, and just overwhelms you and throws you into this cotton candy colored nightmare. So it feels a little too like I don't want that to get into the mix. I want to keep my influences to those first two pictures, which are fucking fantastic. Mad Max, the original Mad Max, dollars to donuts, one of the best fucking action films ever made. It doesn't have the extremity of anything that came after it, and I say this as someone who loves Road Warrior to death, but man alive, there is such an incredible... As a vigilante picture, it is one of the most satisfying films you'll ever see this side of Death Wish. So that's probably as topical as we're gonna get this week. Because for those who want to see it, Furiosa's hitting theaters. Go out, go support a living legend, and once it makes it to the wonderful eastern and western shores of the United States, every single cotton-picking one of you who believes in cinema as an art form should go out and see Megalopolis, even if you come away hating the son of a bitch. We need to incentivize more people taking more gonzo fucking risks, like what Coppola's done. And if nothing else, I'm excited to see what several decades of cinematic legacy coming to a head in a picture like this. I may not get it, I may not understand it, but at the same time, Apocalypse Now dropped, split critics down the middle. Later on, insta classic. Dracula, 1992, splits critics down the middle. A few decades later, cult classic. He doesn't have a bad track record when it comes to those kinds of insane risk-taking assignments, folks. And I love this clip. Someone from Deadline hounded Richard Gere, if I'm not mistaken, and Richard Gere just gives his response where he says, "This is the work of a crazy man. And you know what? We need more fucking psychos in the business, man." And that's about as topical as we're going to get for today on with the Old Man Show. But before that, we do have a commercial break. And I know what you're thinking. At the time of recording this, Jesus Christ, this kid can't afford a Raycon sponsorship. And you're right, I'm shilling my own projects. Why? Because I make cool shit. And I work with cool people that make cool shit. And I want you to check out that cool shit and buy some shit too. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is Last Chance on Star Wanderers by the wonderful J.D. Cohen and published by the fine folks at Cursova Publishing. And of course, featuring music by yours truly. And remember, when it's gone after Thursday, you're going to have to wait a mighty long time for that book and that single. Now, the title of this episode is I Was a Teenage Archivist. And we're on like take 7, 8, 9, whatever the hell of this, and try as I might, I want to make the pitch for what I'm about to confess to on the noblest of terms. Because whenever, if we talk about something like archiving, the world of art and entertainment, there's obviously a lot of motivations behind that. There's the motivation of the anti-censorship motivation, making sure that the work as presented by the creators, by their original visions, is kept intact and is not censored by any state authority or anything like that. The rescue work that's been done for so many works that are getting localized for the first time, like Juan Jimenez's I, Dragon, is getting an official English translation, which is monumental for such an accomplished artist as Jimenez, who's like an Argentinian demigod in the world of comic art. Did stuff for Metal Hurlant, worked on Meta Barons with Alejandro Jodorowsky, one of the all-time surrealist madmen of the 20th and 21st century. Stuff like that. Stuff like, if I cast my mind back, I never thought Martin Rosen's The Plague Dogs would ever get an official, an HD release. I thought it would always be stuck on that 4x3 rinky-dink Region 2 DVD, and that was the only way I'd ever be able to watch that damn picture. And then, sure enough, Shout Select releases it 2017, 2018, and I'm overjoyed. Beautiful picture quality, beautiful, just... I get to experience one of my all-time favorite animated films. Actually, I think I officially have it as my favorite animated film of all time, in crystal 1080p HD quality. Stuff like that. Stuff like I never thought Night on the Galactic Railroad was going to get an HD release, and then Discotheque releases it around the same time. I never thought... Although the label seems to be dead, my copy of Godzilla 1984, the original Japanese cut, and its international English dub, released by Kraken Releasing, there's something I never thought would see the light of day. Hell, we've never even seen Godzilla 85 come to any form of DVD or Blu-ray. Think of stuff like that. I think about all the silent films that have been rescued. There was that Clara Bow picture that was found in a lot somewhere in the Midwest. Clara Bow being one of the original idols of the silver screen. So there are so many noble reasons for archiving, preserving the past, preserving history, preserving original artistic intent, making that available for people who it hasn't been made available to before, like in the case of iDragon. And yet, whatever I try to talk about in those terms, I get all knotted up inside, and I feel like a pretentious shit. Because deep down in my heart of hearts, sitting next to me are 18 DVD-Rs, with at least like 5 more burn discs at the top of a spindle of about 20 unburned discs. And I just put these things together. Like, I've got a system for them now, and I just put them together to have what I want in an arrangement that I prefer to have it. I started this bizarre little crusade in and around 2019 when I was working on a screenplay of mine, my very first feature-length script. And it was a very specific aesthetic that I wanted for it. It's this mid-20th century hot-rodding rock and roll melded with the sort of I think Brad Jones from Cinema Snob called it 30-something exploitation, or like, you know, something along those lines, where there's a lot of this reflecting upon the past, stuff like kind of like The Big Chill, and sort of all the little intimate dramas that inspired shortly thereafter. So, but also still with all this street racing and all this, you know, kind of American pop sort of vibe because of the year it was set in, which was 82. So you didn't have a lot of the real synth-heavy, you know, 80s records coming out. And it was also mostly inspired by jazz, mostly inspired by the likes of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Charles Mingus, as well as a lot of good fusion records that came out in the 70s. I think I mentioned John Clemmer last week with his album Touch. Stuff like that, stuff like Amir Deodato. And so I needed essentially a mood board, but it couldn't just be a mood board. There had to be the trailers, there had to be short films, there had to be music from the period. And it took me about 2 to 3 years to get the thing right. But when I did, I'm sitting here with a 4-hour DVD comprised of like a dozen trailers that run the gambit from A Patch of Blue, which is one of my favorite romantic dramas of all time. Sidney Poitier and Elizabeth Hartman are just incredible. Incredible chemistry, incredible drama. And it doesn't hurt that the film is one of the most underrated lookers in the black and white CinemaScope canon. It's directed by Guy Green and lensed by Robert Burks, who is like Hitchcock's right-hand man for a lot of his golden period. So you have films ranging from A Patch of Blue to Frank Perry's The Swimmer with Burt Lancaster, to a lot of the existential road movies, Easy Rider, Vanishing Point, Two-Lane Blacktop, to a lot of really underrated little dramas like 1981's King of the Mountain by Noel Nosek, with Harry Hamlin. I think it was released before Clash of the Titans was released. So you got Harry Hamlin in small indie drama mode playing opposite of a classically deranged Dennis Hopper. And there's also a nice bit part with Seymour Cassel, if I'm not mistaken. And then just a few months later, he's fucking slaying Medusa in Clash of the Titans, and it's terrific. I actually have both on the shelf behind me. So I got trailers like that. I've got short films ranging from those god-awful Sid Davis scare films, these classic, Little Jimmy, if you don't do this, this can happen to you. he did a bunch of those specifically for the world of automobiles, because hot rodding really was taking off post-war. It became a real big post-war thing. And one of the big campaigns that was happening around that time was drag clubs, and I believe the National Hot Rod Association got started around that time, pushing for designated drag strips. And it's something, you'll see it in literally the first review we did on this channel, Hot Rod 1950, an old monogram picture, where there's this big debate about, giving kids a designated place to go drive, and, run the quarter mile. And I don't think he was the one who produced it, but I think he did produce the Cool Hot Rod, which was something I put on a later disc. But I found films like Road Runners from 1952 from the Prelinger Archive, wonderful back catalog of industrial and educational shorts. And not just them, I also recommend AV Geeks here on YouTube. They have this bizarre treasure trove of 16 millimeter documentaries, educational films, industrial films. They have classic scare pictures like Shake Hands with Danger, if you want a good laugh. They also do lunch live streams where dudes just screening films for you, and it's nice to have those two, because I'm one of those people where I feel a little bad for some of the shorts that get, punched at on shows like MST3K. And I love Mystery Science Theater 3000. I love that series to death. But then when I watch some of these shorts on their own, not a lot of them are that bad. And there's this implication that being on that show means you're a shitty film. Whereas, when you come away from it and you actually watch some of these films, like Screaming Skull, yeah, it's riffable, but it's also fun, and it's good in its own right. So that's kind of the way I look at a lot of these industrial shorts and a lot of these educational shorts. So it's nice to have a place like AV Geeks where you get to experience those short films without any of the pretensions and without any of the ribbing. And so that's another element that went into making those DVDs. And then the third, and I don't do this as often now, because if I ever want the music element, I will typically find some of my favorite production music, works from, I think I talked about this on episode 1 of the podcast, libraries like KPM, Bruton, Perry Music, Sonoton, and those will kind of be the sonic wallpaper for the menus and stuff like that. But when I started working on this screenplay, I wanted the actual mood board itself, and so I wound up cutting together this 17-minute film that just takes a bunch of stock footage, different formats, different locales, and I just cut together this piece that created the ambience and the atmosphere that I needed to get into thinking about and creating this film. And so that's how this all really started. It started out as me wanting something to help kind of get me in the mood and thinking. And then over the years, I had worked on it. It had gone from like 6 trailers and this mood board thing and some poor schlub's Super 8 home movie when they were visiting New York during Christmas of 76. So you're seeing fucking Rocky and Jaws on the marquees, and it's this wonderful time capsule. Soon that grew, and it grew to such a point that not only do we get the dozen trailers, and we have a bunch of short films, not just Roadrunners, Kenneth Anger's Custom Car Commandos is on there. I did a review of that over in a short films mix omnibus thing on Fistful of Film. Link in the description. But I also did smaller versions of that mood board. Drag Racing Home Movies is what it says on the tin. There's a bunch of people who have uploaded 16mm and 8mm drag racing footage, cut that together to some classic rock and roll tunes, as well as a funny little thing I pulled together called the Something's Extra, which is just this like Zen unwinding thing set to some Ennio Morricone Gialli music. If I'm not mistaken, from the Fifth Chord and Black Belly of the Tarantula. I believe those are the two. hearing me recalling from memory in real time, folks. And so, and on top of that, I also found air checks of old Wolfman Jack and old Alan Freed and Pete Mad Daddy Myers air checks from back in the 60s. And I made, little mood board pieces for that too. Because for those who don't know, Alan Freed was one of the big DJs who pushed for rock and roll like hell, called them blues and rhythm records, was one of the real big, I believe I once described him as the high priest of the big beat. He was preaching the good word all over. And there's this wonderful moment in one of his air checks in on the disc where he's actually roasting, of all things, Blackboard Jungle. The old Glenn Ford picture with a young Sidney Poitier, a young Vic Morrow. Young Vic Morrow. I almost said a young Vic Tayback. That's one of the classic juvenile delinquent pictures, and it's one of the first films to feature Rock Around the Clock, if I'm not mistaken, which then, of course, turned into Columbia making an actual rock and roll picture with Bill Haley and the Comets and Alan Freed and all that jazz. And there's that funny moment where he's really roasting and he's really lighting into the makers of Blackboard Jungle, assuming that it's specifically like a persecution of the teenager, which to a degree there was definitely that paranoia. There was a lot of paranoia in the 1950s, whether you believed there was an honest communist threat or not. In the 1950s, there is almost this kind of air of paranoia about a lot of things in the 50s. They're very much a sort of a post-war zeitgeist of fear. And you see that manifested later on in the 70s with all the conspiracy thrillers. But in the 50s, I can kind of see where he's coming from. But it's having those little moments of time, things no one gives a two hoots about thinking about, 50, 60, 70 years later, except my sorry ass for the crime of wanting to get something together and trying to piece a past that I had never experienced together. And it's not the whole kit and caboodle. It's not like I lived every day from, 1960 to 69, from 70 to 79. But to create this sort of my image of what I wanted that to be. That's kind of why I keep making these DVDs. And, so it's like, I'd love to have this big, beautiful, romantic reason, preserving the past, being pro-free speech. And those all are part and parcel of sitting down and, assembling these DVDs, mostly for my own amusement. I've never sold any of these. I don't do that. But it's nice creating those sort of mood boards and those sort of things to get the mind jogging, and to create little touch points that you can throw something on, get inspired, and then get back into work. And that's why I'll probably keep making these pretty much forever. And I mean, I'm not the only one, who thinks about stuff like that. There's that great article about Martin Scorsese paying someone to basically DVR or VCR rather, like every film on every fucking channel basically. So he has this gigantic VHS archive of prints upon prints upon prints. There's a beautiful there's this clip from a documentary from the time talking to the archivist, and I'll find it and I'll link it in the description as well. And so it's like, you have guys like Martin Scorsese that are absolutely gonzo about this stuff and gonzo about preserving film history. And then when I kind of look at that kind of stuff with admiration, and I kind of take it in and do it in my own way. And I'm also blessed with the fact that we're having quite a red letter year of archive of rescuing old works. I mentioned the Clara Bow picture. I mentioned FT Depot is another good example, since I'm rattling off a bunch of wonderful big names here in doing incredible work with archiving and preserving old film reels. They recently saved the 1971 pool hall drama, The Player, which starred the actual genuine billiard man of Minnesota Fats, who reportedly had been offered a bunch of scripts after he assumed the name of the Jackie Gleason character and then said that the Gleason character was based on him in truth. And once a hustler, always a hustler. Reportedly, it was one of the only films he felt, accurately caught the ephemera and, caught the playing of Poole. So we now have a lost film brought back to life. No one ever thought we'd ever see this thing, and yet here we have a bit of a well-worn print deal. I believe it has some Vinegar Syndrome last I checked. And that's not just the name of the distributor, friends. That is an actual thing that can happen to film and can result in its deterioration. But we are literally rescuing films left, right, and center. Deaf Crocodile has been doing incredible work and brings it full circle. I currently have staring at me from one of my two blue DVD cases that I just slide discs into like there's no tomorrow. I have a bootleg DVD of the 1994 film Felidae, a wonderful animated murder mystery. I once described it to a friend like this. Imagine, if you will, the violence of an Italian giallo, but with the sort of the classic mystery thriller atmosphere of something like The Creamy, which, for those who don't know, was a very niche style of murder mystery that became very popular in West Germany in the 60s, specifically focused around adaptations of the works of Edgar Wallace. And then later things got roped into it left and right. West German distributors would bring in giallo films as creamies. I think Dario Argento's debut, Bird with a Crystal Plumage, was pitched as a creamy. I believe, was it Umberto Lenzi who did Seven Bloodstained Orchids? Whoever it was that directed it, I believe that was also brought in as a creamy, as an example. And you have all these tenuous connections to Edgar Wallace being thrown in. But imagine all that. Imagine this bloody, brutal murder mystery, but with cats. And no, don't give Andrew Lloyd Webber any ideas than he already has in his head. That's Felidae, and it's based off an actual book by Keith Perinci, and it's a wonderful, wonderful cult animated film. And Deaf Crocodile is bringing it to full flowered HD life. Man, that's what it's all about. Getting to see these great works get the treatment they deserve and get brought into a whole new generation of collectors and of viewers. And I'm going to be dead honest, I don't think physical media will ever be truly dead. The torch is being carried by so many boutique labels, places like Arrow Video, Criterion, Vinegar Syndrome, Deaf Crocodile. I wonder if Code Red is still around. And also Kino Lorber with their KL Studio Classics range. Holy mother of God, they've been lifesavers. We are living in a very blessed time for those who want to preserve and keep these things on physical media, mercifully untouched by streaming censors, and also not having to deal with the constant rights holder shuffle that happens with, hey, it was here one day, now it's gone. Who knows which service it'll pop up on next. Maybe it'll, go on to one of the 5 million fractured streaming services that have basically turned the whole game into basic cable. There are still some good streaming options, but it's best to have stuff offline. You can throw it on whenever. You don't have to deal with, waiting on your internet connection or waiting on this or waiting on that or waiting on the other thing. And more importantly, I think it's just nice. As an artist, I think it's just nice to be surrounded by your inspirations the way I am. Be able to wake up every day and just look at something off the shelves and say, hey, I want to be a bit more like that today. Or hey, I want to be a bit more like this today. Or hey, when I got a spare second, let's toss this on and, enjoy yourself. And that's actually one of the nice things too about these discs, is because a lot of the things I've curated on these DVDs are short films. And so if I ever need a pick-me-up, I could just toss one on. I watched an episode of Suspense yesterday, written by Rod Serling, Nightmare at Ground Zero. A wonderful little taut, 20, 30-minute piece. When I found out that Spicy City, someone had found broadcast quality masters of Ralph Bakshi's Spicy City, I put that all on the disc. That's on the same disc with my with the most thoroughly reconstructed version of the Hanna-Barbera Special Rock Odyssey that we talked about on episode 1, as well as, I'm trying to think what else was on that. I think also the Mad Magazine TV special from 75. Basically a bunch of shit that I found through Rebel through Rebel Taxi is on that disc alongside Spicy City. I could keep going on and on about this obsession forever, and I probably will at some point. You might start seeing these things grow in length. Hopefully that'll be because I have interviews and guests and people to play off of, as opposed to me rambling into a microphone for all you lovely listeners out there on the back side of the screen. But I think I'll break it off there for now. There is no moral, really, no message outside of, if you love art, you love entertainment, you best find a way to keep all the rare treasures within arm's reach. Alright, that about does it for me. If you dug the show, leave us a like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. If you want to help keep the train rolling, go buy me a coffee at our designated link down in the description. And of course, down there as well, you'll find all the other many exciting things I'm up to in the World Wide Web, as well as the many exciting things we discussed today. Thank you for your time. As always, we'll catch you on the flip side.